Would you join me in prayer? O Lord, may the meditations of my heart and the words of my mouth be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. It's often said of Lutherans that we are an Easter people. We are certainly, this stage, it's no doubt, living in a Good Friday world. I think back to a book written by a very famous philosopher of our age, Algerian-born French philosopher named Jacques Derrida. He wrote a book called Spectres of Marx, and the Marx in question there is Karl Marx, and the specters are what he talks about when he advances a new field of inquiry. He's going to call it hauntology. That haunt is like how you can be haunted by a ghost or a specter. In this first case, when he's presenting Marx, he seems very prescient. He, in some ways, prefigures what we have now. He says that there's a duality to being haunted. On one hand, you can't seem to shake the ghost. It's always with you, even after it's perishing. And geopolitically, as we stare down Russian missiles again, even after having won the Cold War, one thinks, yes, there is something about the way that this played out that simply has not left us. And indeed, from the position of the West, there is always this question of when will it be done? When will it be that our victory is real? I'll tell you what's interesting, having spent some time in Germany, there are a lot of people, old men especially, who you'll meet from the east of Germany who see things far differently. And this is the flip of what Derrida means about to be haunted, is on one hand, it's to not be able to get rid of something. On the other hand, it's to always have its trauma with you. If there was one way that these men would sum up their experience in the DDR, East Germany, they would say that they were nostalgic for it. They had a certain pain of having left it behind. And what's interesting about that, of course, is that from their point of view, it was the death, it was the end of the last great utopian global endeavor that humanity tried. They had hoped that there would be a time in which a capital-centric, a capitalist modality would be replaced by a community-centric one, a human-centric one, a communism. And of course, that optimism went to the grave, and they took that trauma with them. So both things are simultaneously true. While a thing that haunts us is something we cannot be rid of, it also is a wound that continues to plague us. Let's take an example, perhaps, that's more on a line with how it is to be in our shoes. The Enlightenment is another area that we could easily apply the modality of hauntology to. Really, there's no better moment in the history of the Enlightenment than when we founded this country. All the principles of high-minded reason, of rationality and science prevailing, of a better future for all based on human dignity and worth. It really came to its culmination, well, one can say, really in one man. Have you been watching the Ken Burns documentary on Benjamin Franklin? Has there been a better man of reason than him? He not only conquered the method of information transmission and started newspapers and made this nascent country into one that was connected and was sharing ideas and was with one another. He was an inventor par excellence. His work in electricity was revolutionary, and he came to the point where he stopped taking out patents because he had the heart of a philanthropist and said, everything further that I discover should be of common use to all humanity. Ken Burns goes on to say that he's the best statesman we'll ever have. He portrayed America on the world stage in a way that may have single-handedly won us our freedom. And he began his life as a man who owned people. He was a slaveholder. And because he was a person who could be reached through his heart and through his reason, he deduced that this was wrong. And he became a lifelong abolitionist. And while we have him to thank for signing that famous document of the Enlightenment, the Declaration of Independence, where it was declared that it is self-evident that men are entitled to the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, while its self-evidency was written in paper, the spear of truth pierced that document from the very beginning, when the people who signed it did not self-evidently see that in conflict with their owning other people. And we've now arrived at a time in our nation's history where more people are incarcerated in this nation than any other on earth. There goes the liberty. Where there are parts of this country in extreme rural areas and in extreme urban ones where the life expectancy is lower than in places in what's been referred to as the third world. And generally speaking, when asked to report on, Americans do not believe that they'll be happier than the generations before them. They'll be less prosperous, less happy. We are living with the trauma of seeing that optimism pierced. And yet, when you look over at Ukraine, and when you see people fighting for their liberty, for the right to be self-governed under all the same principles that the Declaration of Independence was written, you know that it still means something. It still is going to haunt Putin, I'll tell you that. Or how about an example that takes us into our Lutheran heritage? No better person than Martin himself. Martin's endeavor was a thoroughly optimistic one. He believed that to liberate the gospel from the tyranny of the papacy and everything that they had done to turning good works into a salvation plan, neglecting the love of God, on display here tonight on the cross, he believed that this, again, was self-evident, that the goodness of this, proven through rigorous study of Scripture, through church patristics, and looking at all the various evidence that points to God being a God of grace, revealed over and over again, that is the Orthodox position. He believed that it would be self-evident to the church. He believed the church would simply reform itself. There perhaps would be a council, some good decisions would be made, and we would leave in one piece. Furthermore, Luther was optimistic enough to believe that this would answer the age-old question the church had wrestled with, the Jewish question. Why is it that our friends of the Jewish faith continue to practice their way? Luther thought, well, of course they would. Why would they willingly choose to go to works righteousness instead? No one has ever offered them the gospel. How could they have chosen? But Luther's optimism turned out to be naive as well. And unfortunately, Lutherans today know that the results of the Reformation wasn't unity, but it was explosive fracture. And some of Luther's last writings had to be repudiated by this church. They were the senile ramblings of an anti-Semite. And so we see, yes, that there is a trauma at the core of even Lutheranism. But yet, has it ceased to be relevant? Has grace departed from this world? Generation after successive generation looks to what it means to be liberated and freed by God's gift of love, and they say that it means something still. The haunting lives on. I think you probably know where I'm headed with this as we move backwards in time. When we come to the story that we just read tonight, we come to see a group of extremely optimistic, extremely hopeful individuals who have surrounded Jesus with the depths of what they care about and given to him their cares. And we've seen him crucified. We have seen the death of hope. And we are gathered here today in defiance of the death of that hope. How can these things be simultaneously true? How is this haunting both a hurt and an eternal hope all at once? Well, I kind of lied to you about those first three examples. To be honest with you, I don't think they stand as monads. Frankly, I think that the cross is where they're derived. I think that any great optimistic endeavor, whether it's the one that Luther had, the purification of our faith, that it might be true, whether it was the one of the Enlightenment, that people be endowed with the dignity their Creator intended, or even the one that Marx would so much disagree with me when I say this on, the honoring of our economic life and our communal life together. All of these things are derivative of the hope that Jesus poured out into the world when he came into it. I got to tell you something else, too. This is true, that you will continue to know trauma. The cross stands for the inescapability of it. And as I wish I could, I can't stand up here today and say that all of your hopes and dreams will come true in this life. All those who pinned their hopes and dreams on Jesus saw him crucified. And I don't know how it will be with your mental, physical, spiritual health, with your community, with this community, with a country, with any conflict you have, anything you're working out in your life. We're in a broken world. We saw what it did to Jesus, and Jesus was sinless. I can't promise you that. What I can promise you is that the cross recognizes you and your sufferings, and that it also stands for eternity. On Monday, Thursday, I make a point to go visit every parishioner that's homebound in this church, and I say the words of institution a dozen times as I wish them things, and they're mostly older. I'll tell you one of the concerns that almost all of them have is they say, oh, the church, when they say church, they mean Big C church. The church is in decline, isn't it? The church is in decline. I always say that we are a church that's patterned on the cross. The predictions of our decline have been being made for 200 years now, maybe even longer. There's something about us. There's something about what we do here, and the inevitability of the fact that we will need replenishment, that we will go through many, many deaths, that is actually normalized by the cross. The cross shows us that there is most certainly death at the center of human existence, but there is also eternity. And I don't think that they're done with us yet. I think that the message of grace, the message that the cross has given to the world, is persistent. It will haunt us into the next millennium and onward. And indeed, maybe the final point to make about this, I said that we're Easter Sunday people living in a Good Friday world. The world recognizes the cross for what it is, whether or not they want to admit it. They know what it is when their eyes are wide open, to be in the midst of a world in decay, a world that hurts, and a world that nevertheless refuses to give up hope. And that is the hope that Christ has poured out in love for us today. Amen.